Plundered, Episode 8. The Woman in Gold. Maria Altmann's Fight for Justice. For decades, one of Austria's most celebrated paintings hung inside Vienna's Belvedere Museum. Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer first shimmered with gold. Visitors knew it as a masterpiece of Austrian art. Many simply called it the Woman in Gold. But behind the painting was a family whose home, business, and art collection had been taken after Nazi Germany annexed Austria. The portrait did not enter the museum through an ordinary donation. Its ownership became the center of one of the most important art restitution cases in modern history. The woman who challenged Austria was Maria Altmann. She was in her 80s when the legal battle began. Her case would reach the Supreme Court of the United States and force Austria to defend its possession of the painting before an international audience. The story began in Vienna before the Second World War. Adele Bloch-Bauer came from a wealthy Jewish banking family. She married Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer, an industrialist and art collector. Their home became a gathering place for artists, writers, and intellectuals. Ferdinand commissioned Gustav Klimt to paint Adele. Completed in 1907, the first portrait combined oil paint, silver, and gold leaf. Adele appears surrounded by elaborate patterns, almost merging with the decorative surface. Klimt later painted a second portrait of her. The Bloch-Bauer collection also included 3 Klimt landscapes. Adele died in 1925. In her will, she expressed a wish that her husband leave the Klimt paintings to the Austrian State Gallery after his death. But the paintings legally belonged to Ferdinand. Adele's request was not a direct transfer of ownership. Ferdinand remained free to decide what would happen to the collection. That distinction later became essential. In March 1938, Nazi Germany annexed Austria. The event was followed by rapid persecution of Austria's Jewish population. Jewish businesses were seized, homes were searched, property was confiscated through taxes, forced transfers, and so-called Aryanization. Ferdinand fled Austria. His property was placed under Nazi control. His home, sugar business, and art collection were taken. The Klimt paintings were divided and transferred through the Nazi administrative system. Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer first eventually entered the Austrian State Gallery. Its connection to a Jewish family was weakened in public presentation. The painting became known simply as Woman in Gold or Lady in Gold. The removal of Adele's surname helped detach the portrait from the family that had owned it. Maria Altmann was Ferdinand and Adele's niece. She had grown up knowing the family and seeing the portrait in her uncle's home. After the annexation, Maria and her husband, Fritz Altmann, faced Nazi persecution. Fritz was detained, and the couple eventually escaped Austria. They traveled through Europe before reaching the United States, where they rebuilt their lives in California. Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer died in exile in Switzerland in 1945. His will left his estate to his surviving relatives, including Maria. He did not leave the Klimt paintings to the Austrian Museum. After the war, Austria presented itself as the first victim of Nazi Germany. This national narrative often avoided a deeper examination of Austrian participation in persecution and property seizure. Families trying to recover artworks faced complicated procedures. In some cases, export permits for other recovered objects were connected to demands that important artworks remain in Austrian museums. The Bloch-Bauer paintings stayed at the Belvedere. For decades, many visitors believed Adele had donated them. The case might have remained closed without new research. In 1998, Austrian journalist Hubertus Czernin examined government archives. He found documents suggesting that the museum's claim was far less secure than the public had been told. Adele's will had expressed a wish. It had not transferred legal ownership. Records also showed how the paintings had entered state possession following Nazi persecution. Austria had passed a new art restitution law in 1998, partly in response to international pressure surrounding Nazi-era property. The law encouraged museums to examine the origins of works acquired during and after the Nazi period. However, Austria's restitution advisory body initially did not recommend returning the 5 Bloch-Bauer Klimt paintings. The Belvedere acknowledges that the 5 works were later restituted following arbitration in 2006. Maria Altmann contacted the young lawyer Randol Schoenberg. He was the grandson of Austrian composer Arnold Schoenberg and came from a family that had also fled Nazi persecution. Together, Altmann and Schoenberg attempted to bring the case in Austria. but the cost of filing the claim there was tied to the enormous value of the paintings. The required fees made an Austrian court action extremely difficult. They instead sued Austria and the Belvedere in the United States. Austria argued that, as a foreign state, it was protected from being sued in an American court. The legal dispute did not initially decide who owned the paintings. It asked whether Maria Altmann was legally permitted to bring the case against Austria in the United States. The dispute reached the United States Supreme Court. In 2004, the court ruled that the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act could apply to conduct that occurred before the law was enacted in 1976. This meant Altmann's lawsuit could proceed. The decision did not automatically award her the paintings, but it removed Austria's main jurisdictional defense and allowed the ownership dispute to continue. Maria Altmann had achieved something extraordinary. An elderly refugee from Vienna had successfully challenged the Austrian government before the highest court in the United States. But the legal battle was not over. Continuing the case through American courts could take years and cost both sides enormous amounts of money. Altmann and Austria eventually agreed to submit the dispute to binding arbitration in Vienna. A panel of 3 Austrian arbitrators examined the ownership history, Adele's will, Ferdinand's rights, and the circumstances under which the paintings entered the state collection. In January 2006, the panel ruled that Austria should return 5 Klimt paintings to Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer's heirs. They were Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer 1, Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer 2, Apple Tree 1, Birch Forest, and Houses at Unterach on Lake Attersee. The Belvedere later described the decision as one of the world's most significant art restitution cases. The return created powerful emotions in Austria. Many Austrians regarded the golden portrait as a national treasure. It had become closely associated with Vienna and Austrian modernism. But popularity does not create lawful ownership. A museum can care for a painting, display it for decades, and make it part of national identity. That does not erase the circumstances through which the object was acquired. Maria Altmann made clear that the case was about justice for her family. The paintings represented more than financial value. They were connected to relatives who had been persecuted, displaced, and deprived of their property. After the restitution, the 5 paintings were transported to the United States. They were displayed together at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The heirs later decided to sell them. Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer 1 was purchased by businessman and art collector Ronald Lauder for the Noy Gallery in New York. Reports valued the private sale at approximately $135 million, then a record price for a painting. The portrait remains on public display there. The sale has sometimes been used to criticize restitution claims. Some argue that if heirs sell a returned object, the claim must have been about money. But restitution does not require an heir to preserve an object forever. The purpose is to restore the right to decide. Before restitution, the museum controlled the painting. After restitution, the lawful heirs could keep it, lend it, donate it, or sell it. That freedom of choice is part of ownership. Maria Altmann's case also exposed the importance of language. A work described as national property may once have belonged to a persecuted family. A donation may have occurred under pressure. A legal-looking transfer may conceal confiscation. A museum label may tell the story of the artist while saying little about the people who lost the artwork. Restitution research must examine more than the final paperwork. It must ask what conditions produced the transfer. Maria Altmann died in 2011 at the age of 94. She had spent most of her life in the United States. Her legal victory did not reverse the persecution her family endured. It did not return their Vienna home or restore the world that existed before 1938, but it corrected one part of the historical record. Adele Bloch-Bauer was no longer an anonymous woman surrounded by gold. Her name was restored. The family's ownership was recognized, and the painting's history could no longer be separated from Nazi persecution. The case encouraged museums, governments, and families around the world to examine collections more carefully. It demonstrated that many unresolved claims were not ancient disputes. They were living consequences of theft, exile, and incomplete post-war restitution. The woman in gold is beautiful, but its beauty should not hide its history. Behind the gold was a family. Behind the museum label was a confiscation. And behind the legal victory was a woman who refused to accept that the passage of time had transformed injustice into lawful ownership. In the next episode of Plundered, we investigate artworks that are still missing. Paintings disappeared into private collections, criminal networks, destroyed buildings, and unknown hiding places. Some may never be found, others may be hanging in plain sight. This is Plundered, an investigation into Nazi looting and the search for justice.